Hello and welcome to our morning edition of Arirang News on this June 3rd, Election Day. I'm Peunji. As the 9th nationwide local elections begin today, voters are heading to polling stations to cast their ballots. Voting kicked off at 6 a.m. and will run through 6 p.m. at 14,288 polling stations nationwide. We have our correspondent Chung Hae-rim at a polling station in Seoul. Hae-rim, where are you now and what's the situation there?
Good morning, Eunji. I'm currently standing outside Sangdo-Sadong Community Center in Dongjak-gu District in Seoul, where voting has been going on since 6 a.m. As you can see, many people are here to cast their votes, and the station is getting pretty crowded. These elections are the first nationwide vote since the Lee administration took office in June last year. More than 44.6 million people are eligible to vote, and 10.4 million have already cast their ballots during the two-day early elections last week. Let's hear from some of the voters.
We wanted our vote to help make the country a better place and think voting is something everyone should do. We are expecting a child, and that's expensive. So we paid close attention to policies related to childcare support and family welfare.
Now that we're expecting a child and both working, issues like maternal leave are especially important to us. We hope there will be greater efforts to improve and better promote these benefits for working families.
What's most important is electing a capable mayor for Seoul. I believe voting is one of the most important responsibilities. I'm over 70 years old now, and I've never missed an election.
Right, Hae-rim. So for the voters who haven't had the chance to vote yet, is there anything they should know beforehand?
Yes, Eunji. So in order to vote, people need a valid government-issued ID or mobile identification app. Unlike early voting, they can only vote at the designated polling areas, which is based on their residency address. Your station can be checked through the National Election Commission website or in the notice that was mailed to your home. Around 150,000 foreign residents are eligible to vote. To vote, they must have permanent residency and have lived in Korea for at least 3 years. Lastly, voters are not allowed to take photos of their ballots inside polling stations. Marking more than one candidate will also invalidate your ballot. That's all I have at Sangdo-dong. Back to you, Eunji.
All right, that was our correspondent Chung Hae-rim at a polling station in Seoul. And for more on how this year's election is playing out, let's turn to our Park Kon-woo at Arirang's extended reality studio. Kon-woo, tell us more.
Welcome to Arirang's extended reality XR studio to take a closer look at voter turnout. Starting with voter participation, according to data from the National Election Commission, as of 9 a.m., voter turnout stood at 7.4%. Out of the 44,649,908 eligible voters, those born on or before June 4, 2008, and excluding early voters as well, over 3.3 million people cast their ballots as of 9 a.m. today. Now that it's just past 10, even more voters are expected to have cast their ballots across the country. The National Election Commission will announce the final voter turnout after voting ends at 6 p.m., with the potential turnout rate to be released at around 8 p.m. Moving on to the hourly breakdown of voter participation, polling stations opened at 6 a.m. today, and the first official turnout figure, released at 7 a.m., stood at 2%. That's 3 percentage points higher than 4 years ago. And also, the rate had climbed to 4.5% the hour later and also climbing to 7.4% as of 9 a.m. We can see that the number of ballots cast has been increasing with each passing hour. Adding to that momentum is this year's record-high early voting turnout of 23.51%. That figure will be reflected in the overall turnout from 1 p.m. Now turning to the voter turnout by region. Of the country's 16 cities and provinces, as you can see on this map, Gangwon-do Province and Daegu City each reached 9.2%, the highest among all counties and provinces and cities, that is, across the country, followed by Gyeongsang-buk-do Province at 9%. But at the other end of the spectrum, we can see that Jeollabuk-do Province is seeing 6%, while Sejong City 5.9%, and also Jeonnam-Gwangju United Special City recording 5.7%, the lowest among all provinces and cities. If we take a closer look at some of the key battleground areas, including 5 regions that both the ruling Democratic Party and the People Power Party have identified as crucial to the race. Starting with Seoul, we see that Seoul has 6.9% of voters that went to cast their ballots, followed by 7.1% recorded in Gyeonggi-do province, the most populous area across the country. And if we come take a look at the southern cities, we see that Busan City, the second largest city in Korea, has recorded 7.3%, while also we're seeing Ulsan City at 7.8%, Daegu at 9.2%, while Gyeongsangnam-do province, we see 8.5%. And now, finally, let's take a look at voter turnout in previous local elections. In each of the past 5 elections, voter turnout has exceeded the 50% mark. The highest turnout over the past 2 decades was recorded in 2018 during the 7th local elections, when more than 60% of the total voters cast their ballots. The most recent election saw the lowest turnout, finishing just above 50%. However, with this year's early voter turnout running nearly 3 percentage points higher than in the previous election, attention is now on whether overall voter turnout will also surpass the previous figure. And we'll get a clear picture after 1 p.m. when early voting ballots are incorporated into this official turnout rally. And I'll be back at 12 with some more updates. Now back to you, Inji.
All right, thank you for that, Konu. So with closely contested races unfolding across major cities, provinces, and key parliamentary districts, our Lee Soo-jin takes a closer look at the key battleground races and what's at stake.
It's election day with several key races still neck and neck. Here's a look at the candidates and why these contests are garnering attention nationally. We begin with the local elections, which will shape regional leadership for the next 4 years. The spotlight is on this Seoul mayor race in the capital city, a closely watched contest between Oh Se-hoon of the People Power Party and Chung Won-ho of the Democratic Party. To describe this Seoul mayor race in one sentence, a showdown between a 4-term conservative incumbent with 10 years of experience and a progressive local administration expert who served 12 years as a 3-term district head. The focus is also on the governor race in Gyeonggi-do, the nation's most populous province, where Chu Mi-ae of the Democratic Party, a 6-term lawmaker and former justice minister, is facing off against Yang Hyung-ja of the People Power Party, the first female executive at Samsung Electronics' semiconductor division. As for this race, it's garnering attention as it is guaranteed to produce South Korea's first ever female provincial governor. And as for the mayoral race in Busan, the nation's 2nd largest city and a traditionally conservative stronghold, Jeon Jae-soo of the Democratic Party, a 3-term lawmaker who resigned from his parliamentary seat to run for mayor, is facing off against Park Hyun-jun of the People Power Party, the incumbent mayor. The Busan mayoral race marks a high-stakes battle as a popular progressive candidate seeks to break into a long-standing conservative stronghold. The final local election we want to highlight is the governor contest in Gangwon-do, a traditionally conservative province where Woo Sang-woo of the Democratic Party, a veteran politician and former 4-term lawmaker, is taking on incumbent Governor Kim Jin-tae of the People Power Party. The key significance here is that it has become a closely watched battle as a high-profile progressive figure seeks to make inroads into a traditionally conservative border province. Alongside the local elections, by-elections for 14 National Assembly seats are also underway. A closely watched by-election is the one taking place in Busan's Busan-puk A district after 3-term DP lawmaker Jeon Jae-soo stepped down to run for mayor of Busan. The race in the key swing district features Ha Jung-woo of the Democratic Party, a former presidential secretary on AI, against former Minister Bang Min-sik of the People Power Party, and high-profile independent candidate Han Dong-hoon, a former PPP floor leader. To describe the significance of this race in one sentence, a closely watched battle because it has transformed into a high-stakes 3-way battlefield with a split conservative vote. The National Assembly by-election in Gyeonggi-do, Pyeongtaek-B, home to the massive Samsung Electronics Pyeongtaek Semiconductor campus, pits former prosecutor Kim Yong-nam of the Democratic Party against former lawmaker Yoo Wi-dong of the People Power Party and former Justice Minister Cho Guk of the Cho Guk Innovation Party. This race has emerged as a closely watched three-way contest in one of the nation's key industrial hubs, with attention focused on the split progressive vote between the ruling party candidate and the high-profile third-party leader. Amid heightened political tensions and tight races across key battlegrounds, the stakes remain high in both the local elections and parliamentary by-elections. But by the end of tonight, we'll finally see the clear map of South Korea's new political landscape.
This year's election is considered one of the country's most complex ones due to the number of local leaders chosen at once. Our Park Juna reports on the detailed voting process.
Coming exactly 1 year after the 2025 presidential election, voters in Korea are heading to the polls for the 9th nationwide local elections. In most parts of the country, eligible voters aged 18 or older will be handed a total of 7 different colored ballots to elect positions, ranging from provincial governors to local council members. Voters in Sejong City and on Jeju Island, which operate under special administrative systems, will receive just 4 ballots. Some 150,000 foreign residents can vote. To qualify, foreign nationals must have held permanent residency for at least 3 years and be on their local foreigner registry. While early voting was available at any polling station nationwide, voting on election day works a bit differently. Voters must bring a valid ID card or mobile identification app and vote only at their designated polling station based on their resident registration address as of May 12th. Polling stations across the country will be open from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. To keep things organized, the voting process is split into 2 rounds. In the first round, voters receive 3 ballots, a white-colored ballot for metropolitan mayor or provincial governor. The light green ballot is to choose the superintendent of education, and the axial ballot is to elect the head of the local district, city, or county. In the second round, voters receive the remaining 4 ballots to select local council members. The light pink and sky gray ballots are used to elect local constituency council members at both the broader provincial and tighter district levels. Lastly, the sky blue and cream ballots are for proportional representation representatives. When voting, you must choose only one candidate or party per ballot. Marking 2 or more names or parties will instantly invalidate your vote. Votes will be counted immediately once the polls close on June 3rd, ushering in a new 4-year term for local leaders, including the next mayor of Seoul. Park Juna, Arirang News.
Voters across Korea are heading to the polls today for the country's 9th nationwide local elections. But why do local elections matter? Our Kim Jun-ho explains more.
On June 3rd, Korea holds its nationwide local elections where voters choose the leaders of their communities. While some decisions are made on a national level, everyday issues like transportation, education, and housing are often handled locally. Let's take the capital, Seoul, as an example. Whoever wins the race for mayor will help shape the daily lives and livelihoods of more than 9 million Seoul residents. Backed by a budget of around $33 billion this year, the mayor determines the direction of the city's policies and spending priorities. It's not just mayors who are elected. At the local level are heads of smaller districts, cities, and counties who handle services closer to daily life. Council members are also elected at both the metropolitan and local levels to oversee government affairs. Some ballots are cast for political parties rather than individual candidates, with proportional seats allocated in both metropolitan and local councils based on each party's share of the vote. The final ballot goes to a superintendent of education who oversees local education policy. Local elections are often seen as a barometer of public sentiment toward the sitting government. They can also serve as a stepping stone for future political leaders, with the number of national figures having built their political careers in local office. Given their close link to community issues, some foreign residents are also eligible to vote, unlike presidential or parliamentary elections. Above all, local elections carry deeper meaning as a foundation of democracy, offering residents a direct voice in local issues. While national politics often dominates the headlines, local governments and councils can have a real impact on the day-to-day lives of local residents. 김준호, 아리랑 뉴스.
And now for more on the broader political implications of this year's election, we're joined today by Professor Bong Hyung-sik, visiting professor at the Graduate School of International Studies at Yonsei University. Professor Bong, thanks for coming in today.
Pleased to be here.
So, Korea saw a record high voter turnout during the 2 days of early voting. Both parties are interpreting this record high voting turnout very differently. So, how could the strong voter turnout affect the outcome of this election?
You're correct. The early voting rate was 23.51%. So approximately 10 million voters registered their ballots prior to the main election day, which is today, which is the highest rate of the early voting compared to the 8th local election that was held in 2022, 2 years ago, which was 20.62%. So this year's early voting rate is about 2.89% higher than the highest voting rate for the early voting 2 years ago. So you can see that voters in South Korea show their enthusiasm to cast their ballots. Whether it's working in favor of the ruling party or the opposition party, both parties came up with their own positive interpretation. So you have to open the ballot boxes to actually verify their claims. So we have until 6 p.m. South Korean time to verify the result. The enthusiasm is quite impressive because the voting rate for the presidential election that was held in 2025, the elected current president Lee Jae-myung was almost 80%, and the National Assembly election, the lawmaking body of South Korean government, held in 2024 was a 67.0%. So we have to wait and see whether the voting rate for the local election this time will be in a similar level. It's going to be a very tough test for the ruling party and the President Lee Jae-myung because the original expectation for the ruling party was really high. The conservative party coalition after the impeachment of former President Yoon Suk-yeol was very good news for the ruling party to even aim at sweep of the 16 positions of mayors and the governors, as well as the by-elections to elect 14 members of the National Assembly. So 16 plus 14 were the goal for the ruling party to achieve the electoral sweep. But that optimistic forecast with time has been on decline thanks to the gradual comeback of the candidates of the People Power Party, the Conservative Party, especially in the set of the traditionally conservative electoral district, such as city of Daegu and the Gyeongbuk province, as well as the Ulsan, Busan, and the Seoul mayor election might be in a toss-up according to the positive forecast made by the PPP. So the bottom line is that you have to wait until you see the result. My grandfather used to tell me that there are three things you never make prediction: marriage, trial, and election. So I'm not going to make any prediction.
That's correct. That's correct. We'll have to wait and see. And you just mentioned the voting turnout for presidential elections. And local elections have traditionally seen lower voter turnout than presidential elections, right? What factors do you think contributed to this year's record high early voting turnout? And could it actually lead to higher voting turnout today on election day?
According to the mainstream theories in the election politics in the field of political science, voters will be enthusiastic in going to the voting stations to cast their decisions when they think that their votes actually matter. That when they believe that their decisions will make the differences in the society and politics, then they will be more motivated to actually cast their ballots. And this year's local elections in South Korea are exactly in that condition because as I said, the early prediction was in huge favor of the ruling party, Democratic Party, that the Democratic Party may enjoy electoral sweep all the 16 positions of the mayorship and the governorship, in addition to 14 positions in the National Assembly by-elections. But now many of those electoral districts are subject to very competitive situations thanks to the gradual comeback by the conservative candidate. So that actually gives extra motivation for the voters to actually show up and cast their ballots.
Right, and this is the first national election under President Lee Jae-myung, and some say this election will serve as a test of public sentiment toward the administration. What's your take on this?
Right. Coincidentally, the length of term for President Lee Jae-myung and the length of term for newly elected governors and mayors are the same, 4 years. They used to be staggered. 4 years for those governors and mayors, and 5 years for the president. But President Lee Jae-myung was elected 1 year prior to this local election. Now they're going to serve the same length of time for the country. So this local election in South Korea is very similar to the midterm election in the United States. In the United States, in the first week of November, the American voters cast their judgment on the performance of the Donald Trump administration and the ruling party, which is the Republican Party. Same here. So the Korean constituents will express their support or criticism toward the ruling party and President Lee Jae-myung this time. The situations are quite mixed. The KOSPI, the Korean Stock Market Index, broke the record. Now the KOSPI index is above 8,000, which is unprecedented. And President Lee Jae-myung and the ruling party frequently have cited this as a clear evidence that under their leadership, the Korean economy has been booming, which is a huge benefit for South Korean households and the corporations. On the other hand, in the blowback of the war in Iran and rising oil price in the global market, the consumer index in the month of May, just last month, was 3.1%, which is the lowest, the worst record since March of 2024. So although the stock market is going really strong, there is a concern that the strong stock market has not been translated in the improvement of living conditions for ordinary citizens and the majority of the households. How the voters are going to assess the performance of the ruling party and the president's office in terms of their assessment of their living conditions will be one of the critical issues that will determine the outcome of the local elections.
Right. So beyond deciding local leadership, what broader political implications could the results have for the ruling and opposition parties?
Right. These local elections will be probably the last important opportunities for South Korean public to render their judgment about the declaration of martial law by the previous administration and the eventual impeachment of the president, prime minister, and many of the previous cabinet members. Local elections are more focused on concrete issues on the ground and the local interests as well. But at the same time, it is an opportunity for South Korean citizens to express their judgment about the party's standings on a group of important political issues, such as the legality of the declaration of martial law, which has been insisted upon by the proponents of the former President Yoon Suk-yeol and the participants in the Yoon Again movement, representing part of the conservative groups in South Korean society, and the critical position that the declaration of martial law was clear violation of the Constitution as decided by the ruling of the Constitutional Court, which led to the eventual impeachment of the former President Yoon Suk-yeol. So this is going to be the last opportunity for the nation to make a decision on these important issues. And if the PPP, which has been tied with the previous Yoon Suk-yeol presidency, is going to do very poorly in these local elections, then the conservative factions in South Korean party politics are going to face a very tough decision. That the voters have spoken that the conservative politics in South Korea cannot go on the same way. There should be a fresh new leadership for the revival of the conservative members in the Korean politics. Or in case the PPP is going to do fairly better than originally expected, then the current leadership with Mr. Jang Dong-hyuk, who has refused to make a clean and fundamental break with the former President Yoon Suk-yeol, is going to double his political capital. So the conservative party politics in South Korea is going to enjoy its short-term survival.
Right, and a lot of attention is focused on the race for Seoul mayor, as the city has the country's largest voting bloc in a region with a high proportion of centrist voters. How do you think the race will turn out there?
If you look back at the last 3 presidential elections in South Korea, the election results were basically decided by 3 big electoral districts. One is, as you mentioned, Seoul, the capital city of South Korea, and the Gyeonggi province, the province surrounding the Seoul, and the Chungcheong province. Now, Chungcheong province has about 4.4 million voters. So, any candidate that carry the majority of votes in these 3 critical big electoral districts is going to win the presidential election, as proven by the results of the previous 3 presidential elections. So, which party is going to win Seoul mayorship and the governor position of Gyeonggi province and the Chungcheong governorship to Chungcheong Bukdo and Chungcheong Namdo are very critical point of observation for this local election. So current mayor Oh Se-eun has served the position multiple times. He is going to persuade the voters that you can really let the important affairs for the city subject to test drive by unproven, untested candidate from the ruling party. But at the same time, the opposition party, ruling party, the opposite candidate, Jung Won-seok, are arguing that there has not been any substantial achievement under the leadership of Mayor Oh Se-eun for the past 10 years. So it is time for the capital city to have fresh new leadership for the better future of the city. We have to wait and see the result.
Right. Well, I guess we'll have to wait and see how that goes. All right, Professor Bong, I'm afraid that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for coming in. We appreciate
You're welcome.
it.
집값도 사실 수도권 가격이 너무 높은 편이고 주거도 대부분 수도권에 포진되어 있는 편인데 이걸 조금 가격을 조정을 하고 지방에도 살 수 있도록 인프라를 구축해 주는 게 맞지 않나라는 생각을 하고 있습니다.
일단 일자리를 늘리는 게 중요하다고 생각해서 그 지역 내에 있는 고용을 창출하냐 못하냐 좀 그런 것들을 중점으로 보고 있습니다.
일단 지금 금전적인 거는 많이 해주시는데 일단 돌봄이나 이제 아기 같으면 교육이나 이런 게 일단 서울이나 대구는 좀 너무 많이 차이 나서 조금 뭐 평준화 시켰으면은 좋을 것 같아요.
그리고 우리 종합병원이 하나 있었으면 좋겠어요. 부여는. 예, 저 대전까지 나가야 되고 그리고 이런 사람 다리 이렇게 불편한 사람은 누가 실어다지 하고 모든 게 불편한 거 많아요.
인기 있는 정책 말고 좀 더 길게 보고 혹시나 이번에 당선되신 분 그 다음에 어떤 분이 오더라도 조금 더 연속성 있는 정책이었으면 좋겠습니다.
Now, over in the United States, the Trump administration says any sanctions relief for Iran will depend on Tehran giving up its nuclear program, rejecting reports that Washington offered concessions tied to the Strait of Hormuz. Our Lee Seung-jae has more.
U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said Tuesday that the Trump administration has not offered Iran sanctions relief in exchange for reopening the Strait of Hormuz, stressing that any easing of sanctions would be tied solely to Tehran abandoning its nuclear program and complying with any future agreement.
Iran is being sanctioned because they've highly enriched uranium. Iran is being sanctioned because of their nuclear activities. If they agree to give up those things, there will be sanctions relief associated with their commitment and compliance with those agreements.
Rubio was testifying before Congress for the first time since the Iran conflict began, as Washington continues efforts to negotiate a broader settlement aimed at reducing tensions in the region. He also addressed questions about Iran's leadership, saying Supreme Leader Mojtaba Khamenei, who was reportedly wounded during U.S.-Israeli strikes and has not appeared publicly since taking office, is alive and becoming more engaged in state affairs. Rubio told lawmakers there are signs Khamenei is increasingly active behind the scenes. Meanwhile, diplomatic efforts are continuing on another front. According to reports, Israel and Lebanon resumed direct talks in Washington on Tuesday, with discussions scheduled to continue over 2 days at the U.S. State Department. The renewed dialogue comes as fighting between Israel and Hezbollah remains a complicating factor in broader U.S.-Iran negotiations. Although Israel and Lebanon reached a U.S.-brokered ceasefire in April, sporadic clashes have continued, raising concerns that renewed violence could undermine efforts to stabilize the region and advance negotiations between Washington and Tehran. 이승재, Arirang News.
U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer has pointed to South Korea's steel industry as an example of what it calls government-driven economic intervention, as the Trump administration continues to push for a new global trade framework. In an article published in the latest issue of the IMF's Finance and Development magazine, Greer questioned how South Korea, despite lacking major natural resources such as coal and iron ore, became a global steel-making powerhouse. Greer argued that government interventions have distorted global trade, creating persistent trade imbalances between nations. His remarks come as the USTR investigates South Korea, China, Japan, and other trading partners over alleged unfair trade practices, a move that could pave the way for additional tariffs. And Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps claims to have struck the United States Navy's 5th Fleet headquarters in Bahrain, using a barrage of missiles and drones. According to Reuters on Wednesday, Tehran launched the offensive as a direct retaliation for a U.S. strike on an Iranian tanker near the Strait of Hormuz and a military communications tower on Qasem Island. U.S. Central Command, however, firmly rejects those assertions. In a public statement, CENTCOM said that all recent Iranian attacks directed at American forces have failed, and that incoming projectiles were either intercepted or fell short of their targets. And now that's all we have for this morning. Arirang News will be back at noon Korea time. Thanks for watching.